The air was heavy with tension as the villagers stood huddled together, their eyes wide in disbelief. From the shadows of the dense forest, a figure emerged, her movements silent but swift, like a shadow with no master. She was wild, untamed, her hair tangled, her body covered in scars from battles fought in the deep wild. The villagers whispered in fear, their eyes darting from her to each other. What was this creature before them? Was she human, or something else entirely? She stepped forward, her gaze sharp and unyielding, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. The whispers grew louder, but she didn't care. The forest had raised her, and the forest was all that mattered. She was both a part of it and apart from it. Her body was a testament to the savage life she'd lived, and her spirit was like the wind, fierce and untamable. The villagers took a step back, their hearts racing as the wildness in her grew more evident. One brave soul reached out, his hands shaking as he tried to approach her, but the moment his foot brushed the earth closer to her, she snarled. A low, guttural growl that rumbled from deep within her chest. The villagers froze. Her warning was clear. She wasn't one to be tamed or controlled. "Stay back," she growled, her voice thick, like the growl of a wolf, words that carried both a warning and a promise. She took a step forward, her limbs fluid, graceful as the wolves that had taught her to hunt, to survive, to fight. She was no longer the girl they had once known, she was something more. A wolf in human skin. Then, from the depths of her soul, words left her lips, a language that none of the villagers could understand. The tone, raw and laced with rage, sent chills down their spines. She spoke in the language of her lost home, a language as old as the land itself. And when her words reached the villagers, a cold silence fell. "I will make them pay." Her words hung in the air like a storm on the horizon, powerful and full of promises that carried the weight of vengeance. The villagers exchanged fearful glances. Who was she? What did she mean by "make them pay"? Some feared she was a curse, sent by the gods to punish them for sins they did not understand. Others whispered among themselves that she was a gift, a warrior sent to avenge their past suffering, to bring an end to the pain that had haunted their community for so long. "The gods have sent her," some murmured, "to bring us justice." "No," others whispered. "She is a harbinger of destruction, the very shadow of death." The villagers divided. Some feared the girl with eyes like fire, while others believed she was the key to their redemption. Yet all were uncertain. The questions grew louder with every passing moment. Why had her village been attacked? Who were the men who had slaughtered her people, and why had they left her alive? The air grew thick with suspicion. Some began to wonder if she wasn't just a survivor, but something more. Had she been chosen by fate to avenge her village, or was she connected to the very raid that had claimed so many lives? "She carries a dangerous gift," one elder muttered, looking at Amina with both awe and fear. "A curse, or a blessing? No one can say." Amina listened, her back turned, her eyes fixed on the path that led back to the forest. Her heart beat with a rhythm known only to the wolves. The villagers were right about one thing. She no longer belonged to them, but neither did she belong to the wild. The wolves had raised her, but it was the vengeance of her lost people that drove her. As the murmurs of the villagers faded into silence, she turned and began to walk back toward the forest, her steps purposeful, each one echoing the weight of the promise she had made. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, but Amina's path was clear. "I will make them pay." Her words lingered in the air, chilling the hearts of those who heard them. The villagers stood frozen, unsure whether the wild girl would save them or bring ruin. And so, with the promise of vengeance burning in her heart, Amina disappeared into the depths of the forest once more. The stage was set for a dangerous journey. The question remained, who would she make pay, and how far would she go to avenge her people? The answer would come, but not yet. The story was just beginning. Amina moved through the shadows, silent as the wind, her steps quick and sure. She was a creature of the forest, wild, untamed, with the sharp eyes of a predator. Those who dared to meet her gaze would feel a chill crawl down their spines. Her stare was piercing, like that of a wolf, and just as unforgiving. No one knew exactly where she came from, but it was clear that she was different from the other villagers. Her movements were swift and graceful, like a huntress on the prowl. Every muscle in her body rippled with power, the kind that only the wild could give. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering behind their hands. Some feared her. Others marveled at her. But none dared get too close. Amina had been raised by wolves, and it showed in everything she did. Her body was strong from years of running through the forest, of surviving by her wits and strength. She understood the wolves like no human could. They had taught her to hunt, to fight, and to survive. She had learned their language, their growls and gestures, their way of life. In return, she had earned their respect. But no matter how close she was to them, she always felt the distance from the humans. They did not understand her, and she did not understand them. In the quiet of the forest, Amina had found her purpose. The wolves had shown her how to thrive in the wild, but it was the world of men that had destroyed her peace. She had no love for the villagers, but she also knew she could not live in the forest forever. The world of humans was cruel, but it was where her true battle would be fought. Elder Kofi, a wise man and a respected elder in the village, saw things differently. He saw Amina as a gift from the gods, a divine being sent to stop the evil forces threatening the land. He believed that Amina's survival was no accident, that her purpose was greater than anyone could understand. Though Amina resisted his teachings, he did not give up on her. He offered her wisdom and guidance, hoping she would learn to embrace her destiny. But Amina was stubborn, and she kept her distance. The villagers, too, had their own opinions, and they watched Amina with a mixture of fear and fascination. In the distance, a shadow loomed, a figure that haunted Amina's every thought. Olu. His name stirred dread in the hearts of all who heard it. He was a ruthless man, a leader who ruled through fear and violence. His men had destroyed Amina's village, leaving behind only ashes and memories. The survivors had fled, but Amina had stayed, fighting in the shadows to survive. She knew the day would come when she would face him again. She knew that he would come for the village, and she would be ready. As the days passed, the villagers began to whisper. Some believed that Amina was a blessing, a warrior sent to protect them, to bring justice. But others feared her. They wondered if she was the cause of their suffering, if she might bring even greater destruction upon them. There were those who believed that her presence was a sign of things to come, a warning from the gods. The tension in the village grew with each passing day. Amina, however, paid little attention to their fears. She spent most of her time in the forest, returning to the village only for food or to listen to the rumors that buzzed around her. She was not interested in their beliefs, only in what she knew. The wolves had taught her to trust only herself. She would not rely on anyone but her own strength to carry out her mission. One evening, as she sat in the shadows, listening to the sounds of the village, she overheard something that stopped her heart. Olu was preparing for another attack. His men were gathering, making plans to strike again. The thought of the villagers suffering once more, of her own past being torn open, made something inside her snap. The time for waiting was over. It was time to act. Amina rose to her feet, her decision made. She would not stand idly by while Olu's men ravaged the land again. The hunt for revenge had begun. Her heart burned with the need for justice, and she knew the only way to find peace was to confront the one who had stolen everything from her. The quiet of the forest seemed to hold its breath as Amina prepared herself. She would not be a passive spectator in this war. She would fight. She would strike. And as the villagers went about their lives, unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, Amina's resolve grew stronger. She would face Olu. She would face the world of men. But the cost of that decision would be high. She was no longer the girl who had lived in the wild. She had become something more, a force of nature unstoppable and fierce. The calm before the storm was the only peace she would have left. But Amina was ready. The battle had already begun. The night air was thick with tension as Olu and his army marched toward the village, confident that no one could stop them. Their footsteps echoed like thunder, but they did not know what was waiting for them. Deep within the forest, Amina, now fully transformed into a warrior, stood tall. Her eyes burned with the fire of the wolves that had raised her. She had prepared for this moment, her body strong and her heart set on the battle ahead. Beside her stood the villagers, those she had secretly trained, their faces set with determination. The time had come to defend their home. Amina moved first. With the speed of a predator, she dashed toward the enemy, her movements swift and precise. The villagers, following her lead, surged forward with shouts of courage. "For my village!" Amina cried, her voice a war cry that shook the earth. They clashed with Olu's men, the sound of battle filling the air. Amina fought with the strength of the wolves, her every movement an instinct born of survival. She was not just a warrior, she was the forest's vengeance, its spirit made flesh. The battle raged on as Amina's eyes locked onto Olu. He stood in the chaos, his eyes cold and cruel. The two enemies approached each other like beasts preparing to fight. Olu's movements were calculated, his strikes full of malice, while Amina moved with raw power, her instincts guiding her every move. They circled each other, neither willing to back down. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they clashed in a fierce battle. Then, just as Amina seemed to gain the upper hand, a voice called out, cutting through the noise. "Amina, stop." The voice was familiar, filled with uncertainty and fear. Amina froze, her body tense as her brother stepped forward, weapon in hand. Jahi stood between them, torn, his eyes flickering between the sister he had once known and the man who had forced him into this fight. The battle paused, silence spreading like a thick fog. Amina's heart raced. She stared at Jahi, her mind racing with confusion. "Why did you join him?" she demanded, her voice a mixture of anger and hurt. Jahi lowered his head, the weight of his choices heavy upon him. "He promised me safety," he said quietly. "He said I would be safe from the wolves. That they would leave me alone if I followed him." Amina's chest tightened with betrayal. The wolves had been her family, her protectors. To think her own flesh and blood had turned against her for fear. Before she could speak again, Olu sneered. "This is what happens to traitors," he spat, and in that moment, he took advantage of Amina's hesitation. His blade struck her side, cutting deep. Amina staggered, pain shooting through her body, but she did not fall. The fire inside her burned brighter than the pain. Jahi's eyes widened in horror. He rushed to Amina's side, guilt and regret flooding his heart. "No more lies," he cried, his voice shaking with the weight of his decision. He turned, fury in his eyes, and attacked Olu with the same weapon he had once wielded against his sister. The battle shifted. Now, with Jahi at her side, Amina's strength doubled. The two fought with a new purpose, working as one to push back Olu's soldiers. Every strike, every blow, brought them closer to the end of this battle. Amina's voice rang out, strong and clear, "This ends now." With one final push, Amina and Jahi fought their way through the chaos and stood face to face with Olu. His smirk faltered as he realized his defeat was near. "You thought you could break me," Amina said, her voice steady and unyielding. "This is for my people." She charged, her body moving like lightning. In a swift, decisive moment, she struck him down. Olu crumpled to the ground, his reign of terror ended. Amina stood over him, breath heavy, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. As the dust settled, Amina's thoughts began to shift. The victory had tasted sweet, but there was something else now, a deeper truth. Revenge had been necessary, yes, but it could not bring peace. Her village was free, but the scars of the past would remain. Healing would take time. Jahi, standing by her side, looked down at the ground, his face filled with regret. "I failed you," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. Amina looked at her brother, her heart still torn but understanding. "You were lost," she said softly. "But you found your way back. I forgive you." Jahi's eyes filled with tears as he nodded, knowing he had a long road ahead to make amends. "I will stay," he vowed. "I will stay and rebuild what I helped destroy." The villagers, once divided, now gathered together. They celebrated their victory, but Amina knew their work was far from over. There was much to rebuild, much to restore. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping over the people she had protected, the people she had once feared. The wolves had given her strength, but now it was her village's future that mattered most. "There is still much to rebuild," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. She was no longer just the girl of the forest. She was their leader now, the one who would guide them through the darkness into the light. The battle had been won, but the real work, the healing, the rebuilding, was just beginning. As the village began to rebuild, Amina knew that the wolves were with her, not just in body but in spirit. And now, her people's future was in her hands. The story of vengeance had ended, but a new story was beginning. A story of hope, healing, and unity. The wolves would guide her, and the village would follow. Together, they would move forward. The villagers gathered around Amina, their voices rising in unison, praising her for the victory she had led them to. "You saved us all," one of them cried. "You are a hero." Their words filled the air, their faces full of gratitude and awe. But Amina stood apart, her gaze fixed on the forest that lay beyond them, its towering trees a silent reminder of the world she came from. Her heart was heavy, uncertain of her place in the crowd of faces who saw her as their savior. As the villagers cheered, Elder Kofi approached her, his steps slow but steady. He looked at her with deep respect, his voice soft but filled with wisdom. "Your strength has brought peace to this village," he said. "But remember, true power is not in the strength to fight. It is in the strength to choose peace, even after everything that has been lost." Amina listened, her eyes still fixed on the trees in the distance. She didn't speak, but the elder's words echoed in her mind. Peace. What did peace mean for someone like her? She had fought for it, bled for it, but could it truly fill the emptiness inside her? That night, after the celebrations had quieted and the village fell into a peaceful silence, Amina sat alone, her thoughts tangled in confusion. The howls of the wolves carried through the air, reaching her ears like a song of her past. She stared at the forest, a longing deep in her chest. "They're still out there," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The wild world of the wolves, her world, was calling her. The pull was strong, and her heart ached with the weight of it. The village around her was peaceful, yes. The people were kind, their acceptance warm. Yet Amina could not shake the feeling that she didn't truly belong here. She watched the children play in the village square, laughing and running, unaware of the struggles that had shaped her. "I don't fit here," she whispered to herself, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. The village had become a place of safety, but it wasn't home. Alone in her thoughts, Amina reflected on the journey she had taken. She had fought for vengeance, for the destruction of the man who had torn her life apart. But now that it was done, she wondered if it had been worth it. She looked down at the scars on her hands, the marks left by the battles she had fought. They were physical reminders of the pain and violence that had filled her life. "I've avenged my people," she thought, "but has it brought me peace?" The answer didn't come to her. She felt a void, a space that victory had not filled. She longed for something she couldn't name, something deeper than the fight for revenge. As she sat, staring out toward the forest, the elder appeared by her side, his presence steady and calm. He said nothing at first, simply sitting with her, watching the same horizon. Finally, he spoke. "True strength," he said softly, "is not in fighting. It is in knowing when to put down your sword and choose a different path." Amina turned to him, her heart heavy with his words. He spoke of peace, but what did that truly mean for her? She had spent so long fighting, had shed so much blood, both her own and others. How could she lay down the sword now? The elder's voice broke through her thoughts. "You must find a new way," he said. "Not by forsaking the wild, but by bringing both the wild and the human together." Amina stood, her heart beginning to understand. "I can't live in two worlds," she thought. "But I can bring them together." She had been torn between the village and the forest, between the wolves and the humans. But now, she saw a way forward. She could stay in the village, protect the people she had saved, and still honor the wild world that had shaped her. She approached the elder, her steps firm. "I will stay," she said, her voice strong. "But I will help guide the village, just as you've guided me." Elder Kofi smiled, knowing that Amina had found her true path. She would no longer be a warrior seeking vengeance, but a leader who understood the strength of peace and the power of the wild. Together, they could lead the village into a new era. The villagers gathered around Amina once more, but this time, their words were not just a victory. "She is our protector," one villager said, his voice full of admiration. Amina nodded, accepting the responsibility that now lay on her shoulders. She was ready to lead them, to help them rebuild not just the village, but the bond between the wild and the human. "Together," Amina said, her voice steady, "we will find a new way forward." As dawn broke the next morning, Amina stood at the edge of the village, gazing toward the forest. The past was behind her now. The pain, the vengeance, the struggle, it was all in the past. The future is ours to shape, she thought, feeling the pull of both worlds within her. With the wolves at her back and the village at her front, Amina stepped forward, ready to lead them all into a new beginning. Amina sat on the hill, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, spreading its golden glow across the land. She was alone, with only the wind's whisper and the distant howls of wolves to keep her company. Her heart felt heavy as she gazed out over the world. Is this peace? She wondered. The battle was behind her now, but the weight of what she had done pressed on her mind, and the silence only deepened her thoughts. Her mind wandered back to the battle. She remembered the rush, the surge of power when she struck down her enemies, the satisfaction of watching her foes fall. But now, with the quiet morning wrapping around her, she understood something deeper. I thought revenge would fill the emptiness, she whispered to herself. But it hasn't. Vengeance never fills the heart. The words hung in the air like the first breath of dawn, real and undeniable. She turned her thoughts further back, to the days when she lived in the wild, among the wolves. I was free then, she thought. But I was also lost. The wolves had taught her survival, how to fight, how to endure. But survival alone hadn't been enough. She had been a shadow of herself, chasing a world that didn't understand her. The humans had shown her a different way. Humanity taught me how to choose, she realized. The choice to fight, to build, to heal, that was the path that had made her whole. The wind stirred again, and Amina's fists tightened. I could destroy it all. Burn everything down, she thought. The idea, once so powerful, now felt empty. But what would that leave, she asked herself. More destruction. More pain. She understood now. True strength wasn't in what one could destroy, but in what one could heal. The path wasn't about vengeance, it was about rebuilding. The choice to rebuild, that was where true power lay. Looking back toward the village, Amina saw the people she had once seen as mere bystanders, as pawns in a game of war. She thought of how her heart had been filled with hatred, how she had seen every enemy as an obstacle to be erased. But now, she saw something different. I've come a long way, she realized. I used to want to erase my enemies. Now, I see them as people who, like me, can change. She could never forget the pain and the loss, but she knew now that to heal, she had to let go of the anger that had been her guide for so long. Forgiveness felt like an impossible task. She couldn't deny the ache in her heart. Forgiveness is not for them, she thought, her voice quiet in the solitude. It's for me. So I can move forward. The past had shaped her, but it didn't have to define her. Letting go didn't mean forgetting, it meant setting herself free. The chains of vengeance would not bind her any longer. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows on the land, but Amina stood, feeling the earth beneath her feet. The village called to her, but her heart was different now. I've learned that the future is not written by revenge, she reflected. It's shaped by the choices I make now. The people needed guidance, they needed a path forward. She would help them rebuild, not through destruction, but through compassion, strength, and the wisdom she had gained. Her path had changed, and now, she was ready to lead. As the sun broke free from the last shadow of the night, Amina felt the quiet strength settle within her. The greatest power is in choosing peace over destruction, she whispered, as if the wind carried her thoughts to the farthest corners of the earth. The strength to forgive, the strength to rebuild, that is what I now carry within me. She could feel it, deep inside. This new power was not the power to fight, but the power to heal, to guide, and to create. With each step, her heart grew firmer. She had been the wild and the wounded. Now, she was the healer and the guide. My journey has only just begun, she thought, as she walked back toward the village, the wolves' calls still echoing in her heart. She would never forget where she came from, nor would she forget what she had learned. But she had chosen a new path. It's a path I now choose, she whispered, knowing it was the right one. As she neared the village, Amina looked toward the future. She could feel the wolves in her blood, and the people in her heart. I am both the wild and the human, she said softly to herself. And I will use both to help others find peace. Her journey had led her to this moment of transformation, from vengeance to healing, and now it would guide her to help others understand that while the past may shape them, it is the choices they make today that will define their future.